We're in Excel. This is the current version of Excel. Everything I've got to do today works in pretty much any version, but certainly any of the last 20 years. The first thing I'm going to talk about is something called absolute referencing. Now, we touched on this briefly the other day, but it's a really useful and a really important thing to understand. It can save you a lot of time, and it's just generally quite useful. So I'm going to run through it and I'm going to show it to you in a bit of depth as opposed to the brief introduction I gave you the other day. So on my spreadsheet here, which hopefully you can all see, I'm going to create something to do to calculate exchange rates. So I'm going to have exchange. I'm going to turn my caps lock off first. I'm going to have exchange. You can tell it's a Monday, right? Exchange rate there. Let's put in the euro exchange rate, which is something horrendous like that at the moment. And then here I'm going to have pounds, and then here I'm going to have euros. Everyone remember how to get the euro symbol? Alt-GR and the number 4. Yeah. To make it look pretty, I'm just going to select the whole sheet and then center it, just so that I don't have to put any effort into formatting it at all. I'm going to make the first 2 rows here, well, the 2 rows of stuff in bold again, so it looks mildly formatted. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a number of pounds. So if I say £1 there, then I'm going to autofill that down to 10. And of course, to autofill it, all I do is hover over the little blob in the bottom right-hand corner, and then drag it down. But if I drag that down in a normal way, what will happen is I'll just get 1 all the way down the page, which isn't helpful at all. So instead, I need to hold down the control key. It's definitely a lot easier when people are in the room. Anyway, hold down the control key. If I hold down the control key, it'll do the alternative option of autofilling, which in this case is increasing the number. And now if I let go of the mouse, let go of the control, I've got numbers 1 to 10. Easy, huh? So what I want to do here is I want to do a little calculation, nice, simple, straightforward calculation, just to say this number of pounds multiplied by the exchange rate for euros will mean that I get this many euros. Easy, huh? Yeah. Good. You can just nod if you like. Anyway, thank you, Howard. And then I will autofill it down, so I can say, right, if I've got £7, how many euros will I get for it? You know, that kind of thing. Now, it's a simple enough calculation. I just put equals at the beginning because it's a calculation, followed by the cell reference, in this case, the one that contains 1, which is D8. I've done that just by selecting it. I could have typed it in. And so I want 1 times 1.12. So I'm going to say D8 multiplied by the asterisk on the 8 key, and then that cell there, which is E4. And again, I'm just going to be lazy. It is Monday, so I'm just going to click on it. So there's my calculation, D8 multiplied by E4. In other words, 1 times 1.12. I want to hit return. Bingo, there's the calculation. So not exactly high tech. However, what I want to do now is I want to autofill that down. So I just autofill it down, and then I can see what I'd get for €5 or €9, pounds, I mean. But if I autofill it, oh no, it's all gone horribly wrong. Now this is because what we have here are relative references. That's saying blue bit multiplied by red bit, and if I look at the next one, it's doing exactly the same thing. Blue bit multiplied by red bit. And because I've autofilled it down, the references have changed, which with the blue bit is exactly what I want, but with the red bit, it's not. I want the red bit to stay on the exchange rate. So relative references change when you move the formula, whereas absolute references stay fixed. So rather than getting all this shenanigans going on down here, what I need to do is I need to change my calculation. So I can either do it in the formula bar, or I can double click here, or I can press F2. It's always nice to have loads of different ways of doing things in a Microsoft product because it helps confuse people. Anyway, so there's my E4. Now the way to turn that from being E4 into a fixed E4, an absolute reference, is to put a $, before the bit that I want to lock. And so I want to lock the E, and I want to lock the 4. So I put a $, before the E, like that, and a $, before the 4, like that. Not highly technical. So the thing to remember with these dollars is they're not like speech marks. You're not putting it around the formula, around the reference to say this bit of the formula needs locking. What you're doing is you're putting it before the bit you want to lock. Okay, so they're not encapsulating the E4. It's preceding the E and preceding the 4. That was dull, but I've got to make an effort. Anyway, when I hit return, it looks exactly the same, works exactly the same. But the difference now is if I click on the little blob and drag down to autofill it, I've now got the correct calculation. And if I look at 10, for example, and double click there, we can see the blue bit's moved, it's changed to D17, and it's still multiplied by the red bit, but the red bit has stayed fixed on E4. Okay, so it doesn't look like a massively exciting thing, but there will come times when you need to do something, and it might not be for 6 months, it might not be for 3 years, but it'll happen one day, and there'll be a fixed point that your calculation needs to look at, and you can either use absolute referencing to fix it on that point and then drag it down for, I don't know, 300 invoices or 1,000 products or something like that. You can either do it with absolute referencing, or you can just retype the calculation sort of 300 times. And this is definitely the best way of doing it. So I'm now going to make it a bit more complicated, detailed, by explaining exactly what the point of the $2 is. Now, if I open up my formula there, what I can do for people who find it a bit challenging having to type a dollar symbol is I can use the F4 key on my keyboard. So if I select that part of the formula, the E4, yeah, this is slightly confusing, but anyway, that's the cell reference E4. If I press the function key on my keyboard, F4, that cycles through the different kinds of absolute reference. So I'll start with it not locked at all, completely locked, just the 4 locked, just the E locked, not locked at all. Now you're probably thinking, what? What is the point of that? Now there's a reason for this, because sometimes you want to lock it so that you can drag it down and it doesn't change, but you don't want to lock it in a way that means if you drag it across it won't change. Let me show you what I mean. If I go back to how we had it a minute ago, working perfectly there, I just want to add some more currencies. So I'm going to put in here US dollars and Australian dollars and Egyptian pounds, all of which I have no idea what the exchange rate is. It'd be something like this. Egyptian pounds, there's a huge amount of those these days. What I want to do is I want to drag it down, but then I want to drag it across as well. Now if I do that, what will happen is it will stay fixed on that part, that formula, which is no good. I'm going to change that to a different number, make it look a bit better. And so I want to change this locked part of the formula. So rather than staying stuck in column E, it just says stuck on row 4. So I can drag it down, it will stay on row 4, but I can also drag it across and it will move across. So what I need to do is take the dollar away from the E, and I can press F4 to cycle through the different bits, or I can just take the dollar away from the E. And now that's saying stay fixed on row 4. So when I hit return, the first one looks and works exactly the same. And then when I drag it down, it looks and works exactly the same. And I can see at the bottom there, it stayed on row 4. But if I now drag it across to the US dollars, something's happened. If I double click on it, I can see that red bit is now doing exactly what I wanted it to do. It's changed from column E to column F. Brilliant. So I've now got the red bit in exactly the right place. However, the blue bit's moved as well. I want that to stay on pounds because £1 will get this many dollars, and I want to see how many dollars I get there. So I need to go back a few steps. Now, if I look at this, it's saying D8 multiplied by E4. E4 needs to stay stuck on row 4, which is great. But this column of pound values here, I need that to say stay stuck on column D. So therefore, I need to put a dollar in front of that D. So if I stick a dollar there, when I hit return, that looks and works okay. When I drag it down, it looks and works okay. If I now drag it across to US dollars, I can see that exchange rate is reflected by that and it's working correctly there. So I can just drag it all the way across, like so. And I can look at any of these formulas and I can see the red bit is fixed on that row and the blue bit is fixed on that column. So click down here, we can see it's looking at the correct ones. So it's not highly technical. It gets a little bit confusing if you've not used it before, but when you get familiar with it, you realise how handy it is as a time saver. So for example, now if I put another currency in there, so let's have Thai baht, so you get say 46 of those. If I now just take the last column and then autofill that over, boom, now straight away we've got that. And so we've got 50 calculations there from just one small simple formula. And if I didn't use the dollars on that, the alternative to get that same table would be to type that formula 50 times, which would be really tedious. So that's the point of absolute referencing. So is that useful to anybody? I hope it is.
I'm sure it will be.
Good, that sounded convincing. Okay, so I'll move on to something even more exciting now. SUMIF. So remember, again, at any point, if you've got any questions, just ask, or if you want to see anything particularly. So what I'm going to do is I'll put this on a different sheet, and I need a whiteboard to explain what this is all about. Let's zoom in a bit. Come on, it's nice big numbers. So we're going to have a bunch of people's names. Let's start with Fred. We'll always grab a Fred in there. Put Sue at the end. There we go. Now, these people have fly in their office. Now, these people have a number next to their name. I don't know, it could be expenses that they're owed, or it could be money that they're supposed to be paying someone for a sponsored walk. I don't know. It's just an example of a list of names and numbers. And so what I've got here is a bunch of figures, and of course I can work out a total really easily. I want to add up all of those figures. I just center this. Can't work in a non-pretty environment, right? I want to add them all up, and so I'm just going to use sum function, which hopefully you all know. So equals sum, open brackets. The first one is D3, so I'm going to say D3, and then a colon, down to the last one, which is D11. Close the brackets, hit return, gives me a total. Always amazes me how it tends to be a round number. Never mind. I could have used the auto sum button, but I've got lots of people's faces there in the way and I can't get to it. That'll work absolutely fine. That here, I'm going to have a column for the ones that have been paid, or the ones that have paid, or whatever this spreadsheet is going to be about. So these are the paid ones. And the people that have paid, I'm just going to have a P. So I'm going to add a P there, and some more P's there, and a P there. What I want to do now is I want to know how many, or what the total is of the paid figures. And so you think, well, that's easy. You just need to do some kind of formula. So this is where a fantastic function called SUMIF comes into play. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to turn this bit into a whiteboard. So I've selected those cells, and I'm going to use merge and center, which is a cute feature, but it just basically breaks your spreadsheet by turning a whole bunch of cells into one cell. So I've got one big cell there now, and if I format that with some big text, not that big, that's big enough, then I can write in it in a way that will be readable. And if I change it from being a general cell to being a text cell, then it won't do the calculation. So there we go. What I could have done, of course, is just work out how to get a whiteboard in WebEx. That would have been a lot easier, but that would involve a bit of effort. So this is the SUMIF function. It works like this. It starts with equals because it's calculation, followed immediately by SUMIF and then an open bracket. Except it does think that I'm actually doing a formula, so I'm just going to put this in front of it. Right, so SUMIF. There's three parts to SUMIF. And like I say, it's a great thing. I love Excel in so many ways, but it's a classic bit of Microsoft when you try using it, looking at the help file, because the wording is really bad. I mean, it's good function, but with bad wording. The first thing is the criteria range. And this is my improved wording, believe it or not. So I'm going to call it crit range, because I don't want to type the whole word criteria. Not on a Monday. It's never going to fit in that box. Then we have a comma. Then we have the criteria. Then we have a comma. Then we have the sum range. And then we close the brackets and hit return. What I should do is fit on the screen. I can't see because I've got another box over it. I'm going to have to, I know what I'll do. I'll just make that column really wide. And then maybe before tomorrow, I will learn how to get a whiteboard. I can't get to that bit of the screen. Oh, excuse me. That should do it. Oh, that'll do it enough. Okay, so there's three parts to it: criteria range, criteria, and sum range. Now, the criteria range is just like any other range where you say like A1 to A99, with the colon in between to represent 2. And so by criteria, it means the stuff that you're looking for, the marker, really. And so the criteria range in this spreadsheet is going to be from here down to here, because that's where I'm looking for the marker. Then we have a comma, and then we have the criteria. And the criteria in this case is the letter P. I'm looking for the letter P, simple as that. And then we have the sum range, and the sum range is the range, well, it's a normal range again, like A1 to A99, but it's a range of cells that have got the numbers in that you want to add up. Okay, so really easy formula. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type it in, and I'm going to say equals SUMIF, and when you type in a formula, if you're not used to working with functions, it's important to know you don't have to worry about making it case sensitive. You can just type it in lowercase, uppercase, whatever. And in some respects, it's better to type it lowercase, because if you misspell it, when you hit return, it won't capitalize it, because it will know you've done it wrong. But if you type it in capitals, you can't tell. Anyway, SUMIF, open bracket, and then the little helper turns up. Now, this little helper that highlights below what I need to type in, and it's really useful, but as I said earlier, one of the issues with this is the wording isn't very meaningful. So it's range. What range? Well, it's the criteria range, which is going to be from E3 down to E10. So E3, E10. Or I could have just clicked and dragged. That would have been fine. Then we do a comma. Criteria. Now, in this case, I'm looking for the letter P. So that's easy. All I need to do is tell it that I need a P. But because it's text, whenever you put text in a formula, it's got to be in speech marks. Because what happens is, if you don't put it in speech marks, Excel will think that you've mistyped a function name, or it will think that you've got a named range, which is something we're not going to talk about right now, and it'll go, but that doesn't exist, and it'll just come up with an error. So speech marks, the ones on the number 2, we just type that and then put the P in there, and then close that. And again, this isn't case sensitive, so it doesn't matter if I've got capital P's or lowercase p's. Almost, it doesn't matter if I've got a big P or if I have a small p. But I don't know why I chose this. I could just use R for reconcile. Anyway, I've put in that I'm looking for a P. Then I press the comma, and we can see on that little helper, the bold bit shows where I am. I don't know how well it comes up on the webinar, but we can see there I'm working on criteria, and as soon as I put the comma in, I move on to the final bit. I'm looking for the sum range. Now, the sum range, as we know, is another range of cells, but this time it's the ones with the number in. So I'm looking for D3 down to D10. And so again, I could click and drag. Actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to click and drag, because that's just the kind of reckless guy I am. And so there we go. We've got the formula is pretty much complete. All I need to do now to finish it off is to close the brackets. And when I do that, the little helper disappears, because it pretty much says my work here is done. Then, provided that I've done it in the correct manner, when I hit return, it tells me the paid ones. Ta-da! And then as more payments turn up, I can add p's and the figure will increase until eventually it's correct. Good, huh? And if I take the p's, then the figure will lower. So that's SUMIF, and you can use it for a couple of things, really. You can use it for things like reconciliations, I don't know, bank reconciliations or anything like that, where you're ticking things off on a list. Or you can use it for analysis. I mean, here, what I could do is I could set this column as webdings and then have a proper tick and actually tick things off. That would mean putting a tiny little bit of effort in, and my spreadsheet's looking like I really have far too much time on my hands. So I wouldn't do that, but I could. However, what I could do is I could use it for analysis. If I've got a great big list of invoices, and rather than doing a filter on it or do a pivot table or extracting the data in any other way, what I could do is I could just do a little summary at the bottom to tell me how many of these invoices were for, I don't know, petrol expenses or hotel expenses or whatever, and just extract a bit of data. So here, for example, if I change this, so rather than saying paid, we'll just say method of payment. I can say, right, the first one was paid on Visa, next one cash, another one, another Visa payment, American Express, bit cash, Visa, Visa, Visa. I would type MasterCard, but I can't be bothered. So I'm going to have American Express, Visa, and cash. So now I want to do a very similar thing. First of all, I want to get rid of that because that just looks a mess. Can't bear looking at it any longer. Actually, no, I might keep that for the next formula. Right, just ignore that the last 2 seconds. I want to do a very similar thing here, but rather than looking for a P, I want to look for the word Amex. And so if I open that up and change that P to Amex, then when I hit return, it should show 3. Yeah, of course it does. Let's put another Amex payment in there. Surely some people want to get air miles. There we go. So yeah, that's great. But the important thing about spreadsheets is that with the tiniest little bit of effort, you can be really lazy. And it's great to do anything that can save time. I don't want to type that 3 times. I don't want to have to copy and paste it and edit it. That's still too much effort. Instead, if I just open up that formula and look at it and say, well, okay, rather than looking for the word Amex, why don't I look for the cell C14 that contains the word Amex? Then I can autofill it down and it will still look for C14 and it will find Visa instead, and it will find cash. And everyone loves finding cash, so what could possibly go wrong? So if I just change that to C14, hit return, I don't need to tell it, I don't need to put in speech marks, I don't need to tell it that it's text, because it knows it's in a cell. It's clever like that. So here's my formula now. It's saying, right, look for a marker in this column, or criteria. Look for the specific bit of criteria that's covered up by my formula, which is in this cell here. And then look for these numbers and add them all up. So it's not highly complex, but it's just a standard old SUMIF formula. And when I hit return, that's telling me the correct thing for Amex. Now, if I autofill it down, it's going to be almost right. So if I look at Visa there, which is in C15, if I double click, yeah, it's looking at C15. Problem is though, when I dragged it down, the blue bit and the purple bit have moved. They've both shuffled down the page. And of course, if I look at the next one, that's done it as well. So the Visa figure for a start is wrong because it's missed off the first line. Now it's done that because that's the correct thing to do. I dragged the formula down the page and it should adjust it accordingly. However, there's a way of telling it to not move these 2 boxes. There's a wonderful thing that hopefully you've heard of called absolute referencing. And so what I need to do is look at my original formula there and say, right, the blue bit needs to stay fixed, the purple bit needs to stay fixed, the red bit I want it to change as it goes down the page. So if I just click on that E3, press F4, that's locked, E10, press F4, that's locked. I could actually just select the whole of that purple one and then press F4, that's completely locked. And then when I hit return, this one comes up with exactly the same result as it should. The formula looks really complicated because it's got all these dollar signs and cell references in there. It's not really complicated. We just created that a few seconds ago. But when I hit return, if I auto-fill that down the page, like so, when I let go, boom, I get the correct figures. And so we can see cash is 4 and 7, which is 11. And the Visa ones, they definitely add up to 22. And if you know, somebody said, no, I'm not taking cash, don't want to get the lurgy, then they ended up paying by Visa instead, or they paid by Amex instead, then we'd have no cash in there. And then if somebody said, oh, I've just found out I can get air miles on my Amex, well, everybody's paying by Amex, like so. So this is how you can use it as an analysis tool, and it is quite handy and has all kinds of other benefits when you're just looking at a bunch of figures and you just want to get the result out. The other thing about it is you don't have to put it anywhere specific on the screen. So you could have 1,000 invoices that you've imported into Excel, or 1,000 transactions. And then just somewhere on the right-hand side, you might just say, well, I want to know how much was spent on car maintenance, and just pull out the figures for all of those and put it in one cell on the right. It doesn't have to be underneath it or above it or anything specific. It just can look anywhere. Okay, so let's put it back the way it was so I can do one other thing. Is that useful to anyone? Maybe.
I'm sure.
Good. Just checking everyone's still interested. Okay, what I'm going to do now is another formula that's very similar to SUMIF. In fact, it's easier than SUMIF. It's 30% easier, to be exact. It's called COUNTIF, and it works like this. Ooh. COUNTIF, it looks for the criteria range, it looks for the criteria, and then that's it. That's why it's 30% easier. It doesn't have a sum range. So the idea of COUNTIF is it works like count, where it counts stuff. But the idea is that you can have a list like this, and I can say, well, okay, I know how much has been spent on Amex and how much on Visa and how much in cash. But what I want to know is how many times. So how many times the word Visa appears, how many times the word cash appears. And that's what COUNTIF does. COUNTIF will count those occurrences of that text label. So works in a very similar way. Equals COUNTIF. Now, this little helper thing that you can see popping up there, quite often people misunderstand how it's supposed to work. Now, of course, excuse me, needed that. Microsoft, the kings of user-friendliness, put this there, and they made it really user-friendly, but they didn't tell anyone it was user-friendly, so quite often people don't realise how it works. If I want to get the word COUNTIF without having to finish typing it, I don't use the mouse to double-click on there, because that'd be crazy obvious. That wouldn't work. I don't just, I don't know, hit the screen or something. What I have to do is use the cursor keys to go down to it and then press the tab key. Why wouldn't you? Anyway, that's what that little menu does. It's probably at its most useful when you're typing in concatenate. However, COUNTIF, the range I'm looking for is that range of cells there, which is E3 to E10. So E3 to E10, comma. The criteria I'm looking for is whatever I've got written in this cell here, which is C14. And then when I close the brackets and hit return, that works a treat. And then, of course, before I autofill it, I need to think, if I drag that down, that's going to go horribly wrong. So if I select the blue bit, like so, press F4, it will put the dollars in for me. And then when I hit return, I've now got the correct formula in telling me there's been 2 American Express payments. And if I drag that down, I'll find I've got 5 Visas and 1 cash. And again, if the payment method changes, so will the figures. And that's COUNTIF. Ta-da! Yay! Good. Okay, is there anything that anyone would like to see in Excel today or even at a later date? Feel free to wave or unmute your mic or let me know now.
Not at the moment, I don't think.
No? Okay. Good. Right. Okay, if there's anything else at all that you've got any questions about, it doesn't have to be Excel or any other sort of any office products or any general computer-like things, then you're welcome to ask now, or if you want me to spend the whole session showing you how to do something incredibly complicated, then feel free to let me know as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you look at doing macros?
We can do macros. Yeah. Well, in Excel or Word?
Excel, please.
Okay. Yeah, let's do. We'll do a quick macro now, and then I'll give you time then to completely break your computer, and then we'll do a proper macro on another day. So, basic macros now. Macro, it takes a bit of explaining the idea of these things. They are great, they are useful and powerful, and in some respects dangerous because they can be so powerful, but they can also just save you a load of time. Now, the idea is if you've got something that you do and it's a procedure that's repetitive or consistent in that you always have to do these 10 steps to achieve something, you can just create a macro and put a button on your toolbar, click on it, and it'll do it for you. Simple as that. So putting that in real terms, if there's a month-end report and you get it in from, I don't know, a mainframe system and it looks a complete mess, and the first thing you do is delete the first 3 columns, then you format the next 7 columns, then you put a heading in, and then you put a total at the bottom, and then you save it in the I don't know what drive, the shared drive, and give it today's date as a name. If that happens every month and it takes you 2 hours to do it, then you could just create a macro where you press a button and it goes bob, 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 does it all for you. Brilliant. The only problem with macros, or the big problem, is that because they are so powerful, because they can do anything you like, whether it is typing a hello in a cell or renaming a file or deleting an old spreadsheet, because it can do all those things, it means that there becomes a security issue. So if you create a spreadsheet and it's got the best macro ever in there that saves you loads of time, then if you email it to somebody, there's a very good chance that it won't work when it gets there. It'll either bounce out the email system because it's got a macro in it, or when they open it, their system will say macros are disabled, and it'll have all these security issues. But let's not worry about that right now. Let's just do something interesting with it. So, okay, let me reposition my screen. Just got to move Emily Lamb out of the way, and then I can get to stuff. So I'm going to create a macro that puts the date in, today's date, in a field, and then formats it a certain way, because people like their dates formatted in a certain way. So here we go, let's make it nice and big so we can see what we're doing. Okay, there's 2 ways of creating macros. The best way to create a macro is open the Visual Basic for Applications window and start programming. We're not going to do that today. The other way of creating a macro is to use a macro recorder. Macro recorder is great. It just records everything that you do, pretty much, and it writes the VBA code, which is still there in the background, but it means you haven't got to learn how to program. The nice thing is that if you do something that's almost perfect but it's slightly wrong and you want to change something, because VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, is essentially a straightforward programming language, you can open up the window afterwards, look at your bit of code that the system's created and go, yeah, I just need to change that word there, and then change, make a slight adjustment to make it work. That's the theory anyway. So I'm going to record a macro. To do macros in Excel, we need the View tab. Now the View tab on the ribbon has a little section here called Macros. If I'm going to do macros properly and do them in a real sort of like a hardcore kind of way, then I would change my ribbon to display the Developer tab, which has got some extra buttons on it. But we're not going to do that today because it's a Monday. It's far too much on a Monday. Instead, I'm going to create a macro that puts today's date in a cell. Do I want to put today's date in a cell? Yeah. Actually, no, I just want to make it format the dates. That would be more useful. So I'm going to put a date in a cell. Let's say 1st of the 6th, right? And I'm going to use this macro to format that in a certain way. Okay. So macros, if I just click on that, it brings up the macro dialog box that I don't want. If I click on the drop down, it will give me some choices. The first one, view macros, is what I'd get if I clicked on there. But I don't want that, so cancel. If I click on the drop down below, I can choose from the two remaining options, record macro and use relative references. I'll come back to that in a minute. That's really important, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So, record macro. Now, here's the macro recorder. This is a really straightforward screen, but I'll explain it in depth anyway. First of all, we need a macro name. There's certain naming conventions here. Things like you can't use system words that it would want to use. For example, I can't call this date because date's a function and that'll upset it. I don't think I can use spaces. I'm fairly certain you can't use spaces in there. I wouldn't do that anyway. There's certain things like mathematical symbols. I don't think I could put an oblique in there or an asterisk. It'd be madness. Anyway, all I want to do is just give it a meaningful name, and I'm going to call it date change as one whole word, because that's not the word date. That's the word date change. Then we get to shortcut keys. Now, as I touched on briefly last week, assigning a shortcut key to anything is a pain because so many keys on the keyboard are used to do other things. I don't know of any available shortcut keys that begin with control. I honestly believe every single one of them is in use in Excel, and so I wouldn't even contemplate doing a shortcut key. That's something that you can research and maybe use if you want to. I'd much rather put it on a button on the quick access toolbar. I'll come back to this bit in a second, but here we've got the description, and it's exactly as you'd imagine. It's just a meaningful description where I don't have to put anything in there, but I can put change the date format to look pretty. There we go. Exclamation mark. No, that's too much. Okay, so almost ready to hit record. First of all, I have to make a fundamental decision. This is one of these things that's weird because it's kind of complicated, but once it makes sense to you, it isn't that complicated at all. There's two places you can store a macro. You can either store it in a document or you can store it in your profile. If you store it in your profile, it means it's available to you to use anytime, whatever document you've got open. If you store it in a document, it only lives in that document and it only works when that document's open. However, there's no wrong or right answer to this, because sometimes you want a macro that's stored in a document so that you can allow colleagues to open that file and they can use that macro. Other times you want it to be on your PC so you can use it on all the documents even though your colleagues can't get a hold of it. You see what I mean? So there's two different places you can store a macro. It's the same wherever you're creating your macros. So this will give us three choices because there's two options. That makes perfect sense. We can either store it in our profile, or in other words, our personal macro workbook, which means it'll be available to all of my documents at any time. Or I can store it in this document, which means it'll only be available when I've got this open, but it will live in this document and it will follow this document around. I meant this document. Yeah, that makes more sense. Or I can do a really odd thing and I can store it in a completely different document, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to store it in this workbook because that's a great place to put it if you're practicing, because if it all goes horribly wrong, then you can just delete the workbook and you haven't got to worry about having to find their macro and get rid of it and stuff. So what I've said is call it date change, forget the shortcut key, save it in this workbook, and I've just put a bit of a description there because I felt like it. And now I'm going to start the recorder. It only took me 15 minutes to get to that stage. So here we go. Okay, yay, the recorder is running. Now you can tell the recorder is running because of the huge amount of input that's being given to me on this screen. There's a little box down there. That's how you can tell. Now there's a few things to bear in mind when the macro recorder is running. One is whatever you do when it's running is real. So don't kind of like say, I'm just going to run this, just going to record this macro. I'm going to delete these files here. I'm going to delete these cells there. I'm going to save this or overwrite that. And then you finish recording the macro and go, oh man, it did it all. It's deleted all my stuff. It's real. It's happening. That needs to be bore in mind. Don't know. Anyway, that needs to be thought about, considered. The other thing is that it's not time dependent. So if you're recording a macro like this, and then there's some guy sitting there waffling on for ages, it doesn't mean it's going to take 10 minutes to run the macro. And it won't record the mouse movements, so there's no point going woo in the middle of the recording because no one will see it. So that's the other consideration. But the big thing when you're recording a macro is you need to know whether you're doing relative references or absolute references once again. So this all comes back to how important that first exercise was. What we have here on the macro menu is one of the most important options when you're recording a macro, and it's really understated. Now, at the moment, I'm using absolute references. I can tell that because I haven't clicked on this. That means if I do something to this cell and format this cell, it will record a macro that formats F6. And then when I run the macro again, it will format F6. And regardless where my cursor is, when I run the macro, it will format F6. However, if I go to this and I change this to use relative references, bing, and you can tell it's using relative references because there's a very tiny little bit of shading there behind it. Now, if I format that cell there, the one that's currently selected, when I run the macro, wherever my cell is, it will format the cell that's currently selected. You see what I mean? So if you record a macro and you tell it to go to the last cell in our list, then if you say relative references, it will go to the last cell. If you don't say relative references and the last cell is Z99, then the next time you run it, it will still go to Z99, even if the last cell is Z250. It will make sense when you do it wrong the first time. Anyway, my macro recorder is recording and it's just waiting for me to do something useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to format that. I'm going to right mouse click, format cells, and then I'm going to go, so I've got a custom format at the moment. I might as well do another custom format. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a showing off custom format. I'm going to change it so I'm going to use DDD for day of the week, then a space, and then the actual date as a number is 2 digits, DD, then a space, and then the month as a big old word, lots of M's, and then the year, let's do a 4-digit year. There we go. I could put some obliques in there. Do I need some obliques? No, that'll do. So now when I say OK, I can see my beautifully formatted date. And what I'll do is I'll make it bold and italic just because that's the kind of crazy guy I am. And now I can't see it. So I'm going to resize that column. Right, there we go. That looks horrible, but that'll do. So that's my macro. That's what it does. And so now if I go to the macro menu, so I'm clicking the drop down, and I can say stop recording. Sorry, did I miss somebody saying something there? No, it was just a bit of feedback. Okay, good. So I can stop it from there, or I can press the stop button down here if I'm feeling really rebellious. But I'm not going to. I'm going to use the menu. So stop recording. So that's a macro, probably the most uninteresting macro that you're ever likely to see. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another date in. What's today's date? 6th of the 4th, is that right? Yeah. And now I'm going to go to macros, and then I'm going to view my macro, and I'm going to run my macro, and it's formatted it like so. I don't really say it on the top. So instead, I'm going to go to the quick access toolbar here and go to more commands. And then in here, there's a whole bunch of things I can choose from if I want to modify the menu. If you ever want to know about that, just ask. We'll come back to that later. But if I change this from popular commands to macros, there's my macro. And if I double click on it, it now adds it to my list of quick access thing. the most important thing when you put a macro on here is that if you add it like that, that's fine, but it's also important to then click on modify and change it to a little smiley face, because everyone likes to see a little smiley face. So when I click on OK, now I've got a little smiley up there, yay! And if I type a date in and I put in, let's see what day Christmas is this year, 25th of the